Hello, this is James Hudnall, another episode of Creative Secrets. This one is about character arc. And as I've said in previous videos, it's one of the most important things you can do in a story. Have a character arc for your main character. Because the story is about the main character. And the character has to change from the beginning to the end of the story. Or they have to come to some revelation or realization. Or they have to come away with some element of change in the space of the story, or the audience is going to feel like nothing happened. They're going to feel like everything that happened in the story really didn't matter, because if there isn't a sense of net change, then it's a wasted time, effort for the reader or for the audience. They'll feel that they wasted their time, and it's the last thing you want. But more importantly, you want to make a good story. You want to make a story that people care about, that it affects them, that they want to think about afterwards. And to do that, there has to be stakes for the character. The character has to undergo some sort of transformative experience. So let's talk about that, the character arc. Now, I talked about the hero's journey, which is one method of showing the character arc, and that goes back thousands of years. The hero's journey has an innocent character who may be either innocent spiritually or in other ways, but they are mainly innocent because they have a lack of knowledge. Their adventure gives them the knowledge that they'll need to win in the end. And this is a structure that's been used for thousands of years, as I've said, to very good effect if it's done right. It doesn't always have to be an adventure story in the classical sense. It could be a story about love or anything else. But it follows a certain pattern. There's a reason why that happens and why it's so effective. The human DNA is pretty much hardwired to understand stories in a certain way. We see reality a certain way. That is how we process information. And the more a story adapts to that structure and that sense of realism, the more believable the audience will feel it is, even if the story is unbelievable. If it's done in a structure, in a format that people can relate to, then they have more ability to process it than they would otherwise. And that's something to understand, because it'll be very important later on as I explain. Now, I am going to use some charts from a book by John York, a BBC writer and producer with a lot of great credits to his name. The book is called Into the Woods, because these will be very effective in going forward from this point on. When a story begins, your main character should be ignorant of all things or innocent of all knowledge of what's to come. What we'll call the problem, which is the thing that the conflict arises from. So, in the beginning of the story, your character starts off without knowledge, but then they get an inkling of a problem, and then suddenly they're thrust into a situation where they have to do something about it for some reason. And then as the story progresses, they gain more knowledge. And then while they're gaining knowledge, they might initially reject the knowledge. They may choose not to believe it. They may choose to just try to get away from it. But they're forced by events and by everything that's happening, and by perhaps the antagonist, to engage with it. And so they will try all their different ways during the trials and tribulations phase to counter the problem, or to get around the problem, or to solve it quickly and easily, which will fail. Because it's a challenge, it's not an easy thing that they're able to just automatically fix. And as the process of the story continues, there will be more knowledge gained, and more knowledge that will be gained about themselves in the process. So the story is challenging the hero to look at themselves differently than they have before, or to bring out in themselves a character flaw or character trait that has remained hidden in the beginning. In a story, people start out one way, and that's the face that they provide to the audience. Just as we provide a facade to the world, whether we realize it or not, we have a sense of who we are. And we show people a face but that's not necessarily our true nature. So the story will force the hero to expose their true nature in the course of the story, and as the knowledge is gained, they will be forced to deal with things about themselves that maybe they didn't want to think about, or maybe they just didn't realize, but they're going to be forced to bring it out to the surface. And this is the process that John York describes very well in his book, so that's why I'm using his charts. So now that we understand that there's a facade that we present to the public, or your character presents to the public, and then you have an inner truth, an inner personality, the true nature of your character, or yourself in this case. I'm just saying yourself, just so you can sort of put it into perspective. Because a lot of stories have a personal edge to them. They have a personality that often comes from the author, and it's reflection of themselves in some way. So I am just constantly saying yourself, just so you can kind of put it in perspective. But anyway, you have a facade and you have the truth, and one is hidden and one is public. As the story progresses, they start to merge. The two lines that we see in the chart start to merge, and by the center of the story, the middle of the story, is where they cross. And then one goes into ascendancy while the other one goes south. This is the way the process usually works, and it's how your personality, or your character's personality, begins to unveil and becomes more apparent as the story progresses. This is a technique that's very powerful and effective, and it's a technique that is one to think about using when you're developing your character arc. Your character is going from the person that they were to the person they will become. And whether that's good or bad, that's what happens in the story. And so that's the point that you're trying to make. And you want to explore the reasons for that in the course of your story. So this is a technique that is very powerful for revealing the truth of the character. Because as I've said before, and as I will say again, one of the main functions of fiction is to reveal a truth. We created fiction to explain the unexplainable, to try to define why things happen. Because we all know that reality is often scary. Just imagine how scary it was to cavemen or people in ancient times. It's scary today in the sense that a lot of this stuff is unexplainable. A lot of things are still very unexplainable that happen in our lives. Why do things happen? We try to put context through fiction and other means. In politics, they use what is called the narrative to create a fake reality that the public is supposed to believe, and it's basically what the politicians want you to think. That's something I'll get into in another video series, which I'll be doing, about the nature of politics. But in the meantime, you have to understand that you have to create a sense of meaning in your story. As I've discussed in other videos, you've got to make your story count. It has to feel like there's more to it than just a silly bunch of adventure stuff. I mean, it has to feel like there was something that happened that matters. And the way you do it is through using these techniques to effectively make that happen. Ultimately, you want your story to feel organic and not some formulaic structure. The idea of these videos is to explain the methods and techniques that you use to get to the point that you want to. Always remember that techniques are just tools that if you do them well, they will not feel like techniques. When you listen to some master musician, they're using all sorts of techniques to get the effects that they want in their song, but they still learn the techniques. They're tricks, but they're tricks to a powerful effect, and they're powerful because they hit on certain buttons that human beings possess. And it's not a negative thing necessarily. It can be used negatively, but the main goal of your story is to make people feel like you're dealing with real characters who are real people, and they're not cartoons, they're not fake. If you look at the best cartoons, for example, the best comic strips, the ones that are really popular are the ones where people can identify with the characters. They can relate to those characters. They understand those characters. They're characters from real life that have just been made into cartoons. You look at Peanuts, for example, by Charles Schulz. Those are little kids, and they all have personalities, and somehow we can kind of relate to those characters. They sort of reflect certain types of people that we know in our lives. That's the same of any popular cartoon. And cartoons are just like the simplest form of expression. But the main point is that no matter how complex or how simple you make your story, these techniques will drive you to a more powerful point. And that's it for this episode. Next time, I will be getting into the construction of characters. So I'm sorry about the delay to this one. I'll be talking to you later. Please check the links below. Please subscribe. Please like this video. I really appreciate it. And I thank you very much.